Hello there. So I'm here to talk about the healing power of self-love. And what does that mean? We're so unfamiliar with loving ourselves. We've been trained into pleasing and satisfying people and making everybody else happy rather than ourselves, that a lot of people don't know what self-loving even really means anymore. To give in to a boss that's angry and kind of prostitute yourself to make money because the boss is an asshole, or you refuse to speak up for yourself, that's not self-loving. That's pleasing. That's satisfying the system. Well, what's a good example of self-love? So let's say the boss is expecting you to do something more than everybody else and gets off on you being pissed off, or him making you feel small, etc. What would be self-loving in that state? Maybe to stand up for yourself and say, excuse me, why do you keep treating me like this? Now, you may risk losing your job or other things, but what do you lose every day in putting up with shit that maybe somebody else doesn't have to do? Or that boss likes to keep you beholding to them or in their power because they get off on making you feel small. Who wins in that? In the long term, it's just a process that continues, and somebody that's like that is usually quite weak in the long run. They're like a little child inside. I call it, when it's in a man, the little boy syndrome, or the little girl syndrome in a girl, in a grown woman, where they're acting like a child to get attention or to basically piss off somebody else so that they feel better about themselves, which is not of value. Now, I recently had a situation where I've agreed to do a medicine ceremony with someone, and I had to fill in this form. I spent a whole bunch of time talking to them in detail, vulnerably telling them everything possible, but then they wanted to use a tool called JotForm, which is a cheapo forms entry thing that does not meet medical standards and has very little security, and expected me to put all those details in there when I just shared it with them. And they got really angry at me because I wasn't willing to follow through with their process. But they hadn't thought about their process and the security of it, and that whether or not it has medical level security. I don't want JotForm to have all my medical details of what I've had and what operations I've had and what medical conditions are with me. So I basically stood my ground and I said, I'm not going to fill in this form. And then her little girl stood up and she admitted it afterwards that you have to, because this is the process. Well, she didn't look at the process and the security of the information, etc. It was just about having a piece of paper that didn't protect her at all, but told all my stuff when I personally told her everything that she needed to know. And the form wasn't even detailed enough. It said, what medical conditions do you have right now? Well, I've been diagnosed with stuff in the past and I no longer have those things showing up in my body. I've healed diabetes and other things with carnivore. So to put information like that on a form that's medically binding or committing myself to some sickness which isn't predominant in my body any further would be a lie. But the fact I mentioned it, she was quite excited. So we eventually, by me standing up, I said, well, I'm sorry, I'm not going to be able to participate because I don't agree with this. And if this is the requirements that make it before I can start, I did all that stuff for you. Now you want me to put it on paper to protect you, but there's actually no protection that can happen. If I have a medical condition and something shows up during that, it doesn't mean it was undisclosed and she's going to now have to deal with something or another. It was stated. And that form doesn't protect anything. If the person's negligent or not doing things or whatever, that form doesn't protect anything. So it was self-loving. And then we got to the end And I understood it was a little girl, and she then understood that there was lack of security. I'm an IT person. I know what these tools are, and I considered jot form myself when I was setting up my stuff, but I don't ask medical questions of people. I just say, do you agree to this? And these are the medical things that would predispose you to not doing it or needing a doctor's permission. Do you have these? And I don't even need to know what the details are, but do you have them? And if they do, then they're themselves choosing whether or not they continue. It's a very different thing than, here, give me all your medical details and I will assess whether or not you're worthy or you're capable or whatever. I'll put them out on the table. It's like, okay, if you have high blood pressure and you have this and you have that or whatever, then they're typically not recommended. So, but me standing up for myself, it created a little bit of a conflict and directness that was uncomfortable for a couple minutes, but then it kind of calmed everything down because I heard what her concerns were. And yes, that inner child in all of us wants to be perfect and do everything to the letter of the law and how we've been trained. But my requirements are important as well. And the two aren't mutually exclusive or whatever. You have to understand. And I basically said to her that I definitely had told her everything about me, and I can't agree to put it on paper because I don't know where that information will go. It's on a publicly accessible website with no declared security. I can't do it. And she understood that at the end. But it became a self-loving, respectful sharing of why. And we negotiated back to continuing forward, where it could have stopped right there and I'd been wounded and I'm not agreeing or whatever, but I had to sit with it. And then I understood why it was important to my soul. So how often do you just do things to please people, to prevent any level of conflict, and then hate yourself afterwards or don't like yourself afterwards because you keep giving in? And I've been working with people lately that have bosses that are angry and forceful and all this kind of stuff, and I give them guidance on how to potentially step into a little bit of pushback with that person. A lot of times these persons are looking for almost like a parental figure to stand up to them and show them the consequences of what they're doing. This is self-loving. To keep letting little child behaviors come out of adults is not beneficial to anyone. And I'm not saying have a conflict or fight them or whatever, but you can sometimes reflect for them and they'll say, why do you think that? Or I didn't think I was doing that or whatever. And it's like, well, here, let me explain it to you. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh, well, it might piss them off too. They might not be willing. But right now we're at a time and a place where people are growing and they need reflection. They need somebody that will stand in their power and say, excuse me, that's not acceptable. It's crazy when we just keep accepting things because that's how it is. And it's way easier just to let people be ignorant and other things when really we have the power to gently nudge back. And if they don't accept it, we can step away and say, okay, we agree to disagree. I'm not participating in your therapy or I'm not doing this thing with you. And that's probably safest. If that person does not have the flexibility or the ability to be empathic and see your perspective or whatever, then you probably don't want to be working with them. You probably don't want to have a job with that person. You'll very quickly determine what's self-loving for you. And self-loving for them is not your job. And self-loving for you and them may be completely two different things and in complete opposition to each other. So who stands up for you? I'll tell you right now, your inner child is hoping you're going to stand up for him or her because they've lived and maybe not had their adults or their parents or whatever stood up for them or harmed them or was narcissistic to them or other things. And now you're trying to get their confidence back so that they're on your side and you don't express this inner child behavior in your adult. The only way that's going to happen is by you as an adult making up with or building the confidence of your inner child. That's simple. And that seems like a lot. That seems scary. That's whatever. But I will tell you right now, it is the most self-loving, most amazing thing that you can do is go inside, feel your trigger, ask your inner child what's going on, and then do something that's loving. Okay, can you stand up for me? Can you stand up to this guy that keeps yelling at me or raising his voice at me and I'm really scared and I'm small? Well, if that inner child shrinks, you're going to probably shrink. But maybe you don't even know why it's happening, why you're triggered, why it feels so bad or whatever. Oh, it was Dad. He screamed at me over vegetables at the dinner table or those kind of things. All of a sudden, okay. So when anybody raises their voice, my dad basically thought he was helping me and making me a better child and healthier and all this kind of stuff by screaming at me, but he made it impossible for me to stand up to anyone because the primary figure in my life was my father. And he was screaming at me, all for love, but in the wrong way. Screaming does not denote love. Screaming is his own trauma and stuff that his dad did to him to force him to do it. And I saw myself doing it to my own children, and I had to grow up really quick. And I stopped pounding on walls and trying to force my power over them or my dominance over them because it was only making weaker children. And it wasn't good for me either because I was still a child and they couldn't grow up and they couldn't understand things. So self-loving is sometimes doing the hardest thing, having a hard conversation, being direct with people, standing up for yourself in some way, shape, or form so that they know you have boundaries and they can't get away with murder. And sometimes just to reflect for them and say, hey, excuse me, I'm not doing this again. You said I wouldn't have to do this again if I did it yesterday, and it's supposed to be John's job. Well, did I say that? And then they're like, oh, okay, well, I'll get John to do it. Well, if you're the easiest one and the lowest man on the totem pole, how can you hold them accountable unless you do? They're not going to hold themselves accountable. They'll forget and they'll just make their life easier and do the easy thing. Choose you. So I'm going to tell you right now, choosing you and risking conflict a little bit when you're not used to being in conflict and other things is probably the best and most self-loving thing you can do. To get people around you to respect your boundaries because you stand up for yourself, you respect them back by speaking out and saying, no, I'm not going to do that this time. You force me to do it every time and I'm tired of it and it pisses me off. Well, I'm your boss and you should do it or whatever. No, your words said something different last time and I'm holding you to your words. What do you mean? I didn't say that. Well, do you want me to tape record it next time? Do you want me to write it down each time? I was working with somebody yesterday and that's what she felt she had to do because that person was a narcissist and they basically twisted everything and made her wrong all the time. Well, how many people do that to you? Hold people accountable. You're going to be so surprised what's going to show up. I love you. Have a good day. Talk to you soon.